Hey, we are here on the Social Work Race podcast. Well, today's a video cast. And I have with me Cynthia. We met through LinkedIn. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a moment. But before we go into it, please share, please subscribe on this channel. This is the place where we come as frontline workers and as social workers to learn and to share about what it is on the front line in our jobs. We're speaking to people who are seasoned, and we also speak to people who are only in the game for a few years, and also those who are students. So this is a really good resource for you to learn. If you are doing your ASYE or if you're actually studying to become a social worker, this is the channel for you. You will, at the end of every session that we have on the social work race, know more about what it's like to be in social work. You are being informed. And I've got with me today Cynthia. We met on LinkedIn, right?
Yep, we did. I
Yeah.
reached out to you because I was following you.
Much appreciated. And I think I'm following you back. I like to.
I haven't posted anything yet, but
Okay, so I'm following someone who doesn't.
at the moment, I'm just a follower.
Lovely. It's all right. That's all right. We can just follow. Cynthia, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, a bit of your background, who you are, and then we're going to hit a very contentious topic. Go ahead.
Okay. Life is contentious, but here we go. I'm Cynthia Kelshicole. I'm a social worker. I've been qualified since 1984. So that was back in the olden days of CQSW.
Back in the days when things were just coming out of black and white.
Yeah. So no, back in the days when you had to write your dissertation by hand and you had the paper, the filter paper, so that it would come. Yeah, back in those days.
Wow.
So that should give people a kind of thing about my age in terms of the span of how long I've been in this arena.
Say no more.
I did in the 90s when degrees sort of was the thing then. I did do an extra 18 months, sort of 10 years later, and upgrade to a degree. So I have a degree in social work. Not that it's made any difference. And since then, I've done different kind of postgraduate qualifications, very little to do with social work, but social work there and about. So and which has helped my social work, I have to be frank. So again, it was one of the things I would say to new people or people who are a bit seasoned is when you're looking at doing your CPD, it doesn't always have to be social work related. It can be something adjunct. And I say that because then it gives you a wider spectrum of job choice. So if I just give a quick example, so I have a diploma in teaching, so I have taught at universities and marked work on health and social care courses, and I've also taught on NVQs. I have a postgraduate diploma in therapeutic studies, therapeutic play. So again, that is adjunct, but it's also very useful when you're interviewing children or young people, because then it gives you kind of different tools which are research based. So when you write your reports, it's not based on your thoughts, feelings and opinion. It's based on some solid research. So there's that. I'm a qualified coach, and I have been for the past 5+ years coaching and mentoring social workers. And those are social workers, some want to leave, some want to stay in the profession. So it's just kind of about not telling them what to do, but just kind of mentoring them to look at career paths. Because I think sometimes social workers, particularly Black social workers, we're not always good at developing career paths. So I kind of support that. Um, I did some specialist training. So I'm what they call BPS, British Psychological Society registered. So I can do cognitive, educational,
Mm,
and attainment assessments. And again, that helps in social work as adjunct.
yeah.
And again, if you're thinking about doing something like independent social work, that again is something that is research based, which gives you something more than maybe some other people have.
Wow.
Um, I've got postgraduate diploma in, I'm just giving you the relevant ones,
Mm,
autism.
hmm.
And also I've just re reaccredited to do assessments for ASD. Um,
Yeah.
so I've got that. And then I do have a master's, but it isn't in social work because there was a time when I was going to leave social work. So I did my master's, crazily enough, in research and consultancy. So that's kind of, I mean, I've got other things, but those are the things that kind of related, which have helped me in this profession.
And your current role?
My current role is as a social worker, therapeutic social worker for a large charity. And I work with trauma. So that's children, young people, and families who've experienced sexual exploitation. Um, it could be in or outside the family or peer on peer.
Yeah.
So what I do is it's a multidisciplinary team. So we have CAMs, psychiatrists, other clinical psychologists, and we assess. So my role is to do an assessment called an assessment of therapeutic need, and that's to ascertain if the child or the young person or the family are ready to have therapeutic support.
Mm,
Um, and so um, and then we do what we call safer carer work, and it's not safe carer in terms of social work, so it's not child protection. It's safe carer work in terms of, are the parents emotionally able to support the child as they take their therapeutic journey, and we provide support, therapeutic support, and otherwise for parents of children that we're working with. So that's kind of
So,
what I'm
so
doing.
really, you are a bank, guys. She is the bank of experience, and we're going to get into it as well.
Mm.
I mean, I've been itching to get into this topic. I felt that, um, in fact, let me introduce a topic. It's racism as a sore topic. That's what it is. You'll see it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcasting platform. You'll see it on YouTube as well on this channel. And this is an interesting topic because I've experienced personally as a professional some racism, more so from the public. Okay, and I'm expecting a level of ignorance from the public at times, but as professionals, we ought to expect far less. Okay, because we are professional. So when I was looking at this topic, I've dealt with it in various ways before in previous podcast shows. But interestingly, when you reached out, it was to deal with it in a way that was very personal and professional for you.
Hmm.
So this is a contentious topic. And I did say to Cynthia, and I'm going to say it to the listeners now, I am not a big fan of playing a race card so easily. I don't like people just calling racism a thing because of how they feel. It's not always about that. Sometimes it's a little bit more complex, and sometimes it's about our perceptions and baggage. But what I want to do, and I told you this before, I'm going to, in a sense, I'm going to test you in
Hmm.
in regard to, do you have a chip on your shoulder, or is this real? That's what I'm dealing with. And so when I ask you questions, it's in that spirit.
Hmm. That's
And so yeah, that's fine, and that's great. And this is the thing, guys. Look, if I said to you, you had a chip on your shoulder,
fine.
Cynthia. Now, bear in mind, I'm in my mid 40s now, so I have dipped my toe into your age. And I say that respectfully in that your experience. I remember in the 90s in the UK, and I went to Brixton College in 1991 or two or something like that. And it was an interesting time because racism was being dealt with then, and racism was a hot topic then, especially with the police. And I felt it. I felt the tension and the anger in the communities, and riots were happening not long before that. And I was traveling every day for a year to that area and feeling that tension. Also feeling it as I was coming up in the 80s, born in the 70s, coming up in the 80s, you could feel tension. You could hear tensions. I'm from West Indian background. And the tension and the issues that we face as minorities was both overt and and covert. And it's left a subconscious footprint in my mind, which I regularly have to visit to address. And if I were to look at my career, I can't say I've really experienced hate for the color of my skin or my race. In England, it's 2022, Cynthia. We have moved on. You must have a chip on your shoulder. What do you say to that?
Well, I would respectfully disagree that we've moved on. For me, I think there have been periods where legislation and that has made us as Black people think that things have moved on, and I think it's a trick, and I'll tell you why I think that. And if you said to me, I've got a chip on my shoulder, I would say, yes, I have. And you're lucky today you've caught me with the chip, because sometimes it's the oak tree and sometimes it's the brick.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah,
Let's go.
it just depends where you catch me. And I would say to you, if during I've had the reverse. The racism that I have experienced has been mainly in my professional life. If
From professional to professional.
Yeah, in my professional life as a social worker or a teacher, or an assessor or wherever. And so, for example, when I first trained, out of hundreds, there were maybe 3 of us on the CQSW, and then there were people doing a degree. It wasn't a social work degree; it was a social science degree. Because when I did my degree, it was a social science degree, and then you did modules, which then became social work. Okay, but it wasn't a social work degree.
Yeah.
And there were no more than 5 of us out of 250 Met Plus students. So that there was that. And I remember my very first placement was at Great Ormond Street Hospital. And there was a white mother, and child was mixed parentage. Okay. And I was talking to the little boys, about 10, about his experiences. And when I relayed that back to my supervisor, she said to me, it was becoming too personal. I was becoming too personal because I was asking him about his experiences and mum's experiences. As we all know, Great Ormond Street, world famous hospital. And I remarked, there doesn't seem to be many Black doctors or nurses. And I was told, well, this is a postgraduate hospital. And I said, well, are there no Black doctors or nurses who are capable of doing postgraduate? Subsequently, I failed my placement.
Right.
Okay. When I was a manager, social work manager, in Harringay.
Roughly how long ago was that?
Oh God, that must have been what, the placement, my placement.
So you were a social work manager. How long ago roughly was that?
Oh, probably about 18 years ago.
Okay.
And a couple of things happened. we would go to court. So I'd go to court with my, accompany a social worker, and more often in the family court than in the high court, rather than in the family courts.
Okay.
So which is my experience. So I would go there, and there was an incident where the barrister and the psychiatrist came. It was a white social worker, me as the manager, suited and booted,
Yeah. Yeah.
well turned out, and they started talking to the white social worker about what was going to happen and what was her opinion and da di da di da. They then turned to me and said, "Oh, mum." And I said, "Excuse me."
No. Look.
Yeah. She blushed and she said, "No, that's not the mum. That's my manager." They then blushed and then said, "Oh, did you hear what I said?" And I said, "No, because you weren't talking to me, so I wasn't listening." And I did hear, but I chose to say, "No, I didn't hear because you weren't talking to me." So then they had to tell me again.
Can I pause you there? Can I pause
Yes,
you
you
there?
can. Mm-hmm.
The same thing happened to me a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So that's recent, yeah?
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was in court as well. It was in court.
Yeah.
Suited and booted.
We was in the family court at Holborn,
Okay. Carry on.
the high
Yep.
court,
Carry on.
family court at Holborn. Another experience I had as a manager, that was like the cusp. It was crack was just coming into England.
Yep.
So there was a family where there was concerns because the social worker felt dad was, a crack addict. And she said, "Oh, I can't go to the house because I'm really frightened." And I said to her as the manager, "That's not an issue. We have to deliver this letter. We have two options. We can post it, or if you would like, I would accompany you to the family home, okay, as a method of safety. But do not go and visit the family on your own. Don't do it. I'm giving you a specific instruction."
Yep.
Anyway, because I'm nobody particularly important, she trotted off to meet the family on her own. And it did not end well. So the next day, my manager rang and said, "So-and-so went to visit this family and this happened." And I said, "But I gave her strict, not instructions, but I advised her not to do that because she explained to me how nervous she was." And he said, "Oh, but it was a black family and he was a big man, a big guy." And I said, "But I specifically asked her not to go to the house on her own, that we could post the letter. But we could post and then we could follow up with a visit. I would go with her because, rightly or wrongly, I'm not frightened. My dad's black, my brother's black, I have black sons. And maybe I can talk to him in a way that will, bring the temperature down." Well, she went and this happened. And I said, "Well, she didn't follow the instruction. Well, you need to ring her and apologize or something." And I said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it." Well, and I must also say, just as a byline, and it comes up again later, I was told I was a rebel and disruptive, but that's another story. So I said, "I'm not apologizing to her." And he said, "Well, if you don't apologize, we'll have to think about, disciplining you." And I said, "That's fine. Discipline me because I have a 6-month-old baby. You are so unorganized that I'll be able to sit at home for 2 years while you pay me and you sort it out. I don't see any reason to apologize because as a manager, I tried to protect her because that's my job."
I'm doing a lot here.
Yeah. So there was that. I then, after 5 years as a manager, I knew my mindset and the way I operated, I was not going to be climbing the social work ladder. I was just wasn't going to, it wasn't going to happen.
Right. Okay.
So I stepped off and I became a guardian ad litem. That's the equivalent of CAFCAS now.
Okay.
There was no CAFCAS. What it was, this is like a history lesson as well, sorry. But back in the day, it was what we called the panels. So you had inner London and outer panels. So you were totally independent. The courts would send a request to the panel, then the panel would ring round and see who would want to take the case or whatever.
Yeah.
And then what you would do as the guardian is you would go on the family lawyers list and you would choose, instruct a solicitor or a barrister. And I always used to instruct, there weren't many, but I always used to try and find like a black solicitor or a black barrister. And then after about a year, 2 years, I was told, given that what happens is most people, when you were independent back in the day, you had maybe 3 or 4 solicitors and barristers that you worked with regularly because they knew you and you did that.
Yeah.
And after about 18 months, I was told why was I choosing the same barristers and solicitors? Now, when I approached my white colleagues and said, oh, what's the variety of the professionals you use? They were using the same 1 or 2. I wasn't doing anything different.
Okay.
So that then became an issue.
Were they mostly black that you were using?
Yes. I'm not going to apologize for it. Yes.
But I guess the white, you can't apologize for that because the majority of the other social workers, they would probably call for white solicitors, which wouldn't have been an issue. So we have to ask that question, don't we? But carry on.
Yeah. So that was kind of that. And then I was disillusioned with social work and I stepped off. Mm-hmm. And I became a teacher. But that's a whole other experience.
Okay.
And then I decided that I would, by default, really, by default, I was here doing independent work. Then I went to live in Jamaica. Then I had to come back because of family ill health. And I then started doing agency.
Yeah.
And again, that was interesting because they wanted, even with my experience, even with being trained in the UK, they wanted to pay. At that time, they were recruiting from Canada, New Zealand, and Australia.
How long ago was this?
This would have been 2000s, early 2000s.
I'm time stamping all of this, all right? So I know, how recent, but go ahead.
Yeah. Early to mid 2000s. So they wanted to pay me less than a social worker who trained in Australia or New Zealand who happened to be white. And I said, well, actually, that ain't. And then the excuse was, well, you've been out of it for a while. But I trained here. I know the law. It hasn't changed that much. So that then became an issue, but then they kind of gave in. So I did that for a while. And my experience in some of these boroughs was that myself and other black social workers were not given, I didn't want it, but for others, they weren't given the opportunity to become senior practitioners or managers. And often when you looked at the experience log, many of the black social workers had more experience, because I think there's something about us, what I found in my many years, not just social work, but teaching, whatever I've done professionally, that many black people are overqualified for the jobs that they do. And I've had, when I was doing agency, that they would say to me, well, why are you doing this basic grade job? Don't you want to be a senior practitioner? You've got so many skills. I'm a bit intimidated by you because you're coming in with so much knowledge. or, oh, you've got a lot of experience. And my answer to them would be, I would expect after 20 years to have that level of experience. If I didn't, that would be a problem. But the fact is, why is it ever mentioned? So, and then the thing that then made me leave social work in terms of local authority was I worked in a London borough and I was in the assessment team. And I went with the community police officer to visit a family who there were concerns about. And it was a mother and two children. And the mother wouldn't let us into the house. She lived in a hostel, but she wouldn't let us into her room.
Yeah.
And the community police officer spoke to her through the window. And they had been doing this for a year. So this woman had been in the hostel with her two children, locked in this room. The children weren't going to school for a year. And social workers were visiting regularly, and community police officers were visiting regularly. And I went back to the manager and I said, no, this can't happen. So tomorrow morning when I come in, and I didn't sleep that night at all because it played on my head. And when I went in the next morning, I rang the police and I said, could you do a welfare check for me? So they went, and then they rang and they said, we're a bit concerned about mum. So could you come? So myself and a colleague, another black worker, we went, was speaking to mum, was in this small room, so it wasn't a big space, speaking to mum. And I kind of gauged from before, mum clearly had some mental health problems.
Yeah, of course.
So I was speaking to mum and I was saying, look, I'm concerned. And, I wonder how you would feel if, I got the doctor to speak to you, tell me a bit about what's happening. Why aren't the children going to school or whatever? And then the oldest daughter, who was probably about 10 at the time, flung herself prostrate in front of the mother and grabbed onto the mother's legs and started screaming.
Okay.
And at that point, I said, we have to remove these children. I don't think there's an option now.
What was that? What did that mean?
Well, she was saying to mum, please don't tell them. Please don't tell them. I'll be good. I promise you I'll be good. She was saying to me, I'll look after mum. Nobody has to worry. Well, you can't leave a 10 and a 4-year-old in that situation. The concerns were that she'd been locked in this room with these two children for a year and nobody did anything much about it.
Right.
So then to go, and she was refusing to send them to school. She would just, and then the child flung herself. So I said to the police officers, I think we're going to I'm going to ask you if we could do a PPO.
Yeah.
Child flipped out, mum flipped out, and literally mum went to attack me. I get it.
Yeah.
Just to put context, black mum, 2 black children, 2 black social workers, 5 white police officers, 3 men, 2 women. Mum then went to attack me and they had to restrain her. I think they restrained her a bit much because they flung her on the floor, was holding her down. So I was trying to say to them, please don't do that. But at the same time, my colleague was saying we need to take the children. So it was madness.
Yeah.
And I was extremely traumatized because it was about a black woman being held down by white men in uniform. It traumatized me. So they were in foster placement, found foster placement. I went back to visit mum, but she wouldn't talk to me. That's okay. And then I was visiting the children like every other day and then every week. And the 10-year-old wouldn't speak to me. And I went back to my manager in supervision, and she was asking what was happening. And I said, well, I visit, the 4-year-old is fine. We engage, we play, she talks, but the 10-year-old is just having nothing to do with me. And her response to me was, well, you can't be a very good social worker if you can't engage with the child. And I said, it's not about engaging with this child. This 10-year-old has seen her mother rugby tackled and held down by 5 white men and 2 black women dragging her out. Why on earth would she talk to me? I was traumatized.
Can I just pause you there?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I even hate to. Oh gosh, because you're rolling with the information and I want it to flow. But what's the relevance of the skin color?
The relevance for me was it felt wrong, because it reminded me of I'm a child of the 60s. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. Okay. And that was the time of sus laws. You've all heard of sus laws prior to stop and search, right? Sus laws. I went to school where white teachers would use the N-word. They would have jars of marmalade with the gollywog.
In the UK?
Oh yeah, in the UK. I was born here. I was born in the 50s. I'm last of 9 child of Caribbean parents. And I was born here, raised here, went to school here.
Okay.
And so
I remember the gollywog on the jar, because when I was a
yeah,
kid, that would be a thing.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, sort of, if I get into the mental health of it, but it traumatized me because it was like, my God, you know, when you think and you read about slavery and white men holding down black women or how they treat, it was just, I felt it in my body. I felt it. There was a physical reaction.
So were you feeling this on her behalf, or what do you think she saw in relation to race? Was it something that you think that would have impacted her?
Later on, when she was sectioned and in hospital and in a more rational state, and I asked her how she felt, you know, the removing of the children and what happened. And she said she felt I was conspiring to let white people treat her badly. And I wasn't protecting her. She knew, now she was taking medication. She knew that she'd been ill at that point.
So she was able to reflect on.
But she was able to reflect on it.
And this is really what fueled those riots in Tottenham and Brixton. You know, I stand by this quote that a friend of mine gave me years ago: perception is more powerful than truth.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if we feel, or if they feel marginalized or discriminated against, it might as well be true. I can't say that those police officers were racist, but in such a case, we have to be measured about how we approach things. But there wasn't that level of awareness in those days.
No, but could I also say,
Mm-hmm.
I have had similar, not the same, but similar, when I've asked police to do a welfare check for a white family, and again there was a mental health issue, and again I've only had to do it in three times in 30 odd years, or say 20 years when I was local authority social worker, asked for a PPO 3 times. And that was the only time, and I'd been not attacked, so I haven't been attacked, but people have kind of, you think they might. Right. So the police officers, you know, got between me and the client. Yeah. And that was the only time they tackled somebody.
I've got a podcast.
I'm just saying. I didn't use the word racist. I just said white police officers tackling a black woman. And as a black woman, that's how I felt. But I also go on to say that in another situation I was in, where the mother, in fact, it wasn't even the mother, it was a man. A white man. And I'm a 5'3" midget of a woman. And the police, yes, they stood in front of me, but they did not tackle him. And this woman, the black woman, was, although she was coming for me, I could have moved because there was a safe enough distance for me to have moved.
Okay. What about assessments?
Oh Lord.
But whilst you're going through, whilst you're pulling
Yeah.
all that together,
Mhm.
I
Assessments can be problematic, okay?
uh
Because I think that, not I think, take that think out. How we are taught, and I'm just finishing my counseling course because I'm trained to be a psychotherapist, okay? But in social work and in psychotherapy and all of that, we're taught from a very Eurocentric perspective. So if you look at PAMS, do you know PAMS?
I've heard of it.
Okay. So PAMS is designed to assess people's ability to parent. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
particularly mothers who may, or parents who they may think have some kind of learning difficulty. You know, it's to engage. Now, I stopped using PAMS. I used it reluctantly, but I stopped when one of the questions, and I haven't used it for maybe 10 years, so that may have changed. This was back then. One of the questions was, how much mince would you need to buy to make a shepherd's pie? And I remember I looked at the question and
I'm
I
the
thought,
wrong person to ask that question because I'm a thinker. I'm like,
"Mhm."
well, how many children? How deep do you want the potato? Are you a big meat eater?
Yeah, but you
Um,
know what shepherd's pie is.
I do.
My
Ah,
plant,
right.
you get
Okay.
it.
Okay.
We don't all know what shepherd's pie is. I lived in Jamaica for
Oh
over
shoot.
5 years, okay,
Oh shoot. Yeah.
with my grandbabies, and one of my sons, and his wife, who's from there, Jamaica. And I remember the children saying to me, "Grandma, we'd really like some shepherd's pie." And I said, "Fine." Went to the butcher, particular supermarket. There was mince there. We bought the potatoes. And I remember her and her mum and that who were with us, it's a big house, saying, "What's shepherd's pie?" So some foods are very specific to some communities. So when you're doing an assessment and you're using a tool and you're asking a question,
You
who
have
is
to
it
consider.
designed for?
You have to look at the assessment first
Do you understand what I'm saying to you?
and look at the
And
family.
and so,
Mm.
for example, again, I don't know if other people have come across this, but often, not just in the Black community, but we're Black, so that's what I'm talking about. Maybe less so now, I don't know, but certainly when I was growing up, when I was raising my children, any adult over a certain age was an auntie or an uncle or a
Still.
miss
Yeah.
somebody. They
Yeah.
were never Mary Jane,
No.
right?
First name basis is not a thing.
It wasn't going to happen.
Still not happening. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would go in, or I would read a report when I was a manager, and they do the genogram or whatever, and
Yeah.
then they'd say, "Oh, but the children were talking about auntie this, but she's not a blood aunt, so we can't consider her in the assessment." And my question is, how important is this person in the children's lives? Because if she's important, she needs to be part of the assessment, or he needs to be part of the assessment. So I found that sometimes it can be a very narrow thinking of only blood relatives, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
for lots of communities, it can be the village.
Yeah.
It can be the village. And then if I challenge something like that, and again, it's not the first time because I've spanned things, it becomes, well, you're not really interested in safeguarding, and you don't understand safeguarding, and you don't understand protocols.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I understand them clearly. But if we're looking at who are the important people, or not even important, who are the people in this child's life, then Auntie Mary down the road is one of those people. She doesn't have to be blood.
Mm. And that can be represented easily in a genogram.
Of course it can.
Yeah.
And in a report,
Mm.
you know, or I've seen reports where it says, oh, you know, when you go to the house is always full of people. Well, full of people doing what? Smoking drugs, sitting around talking, watching television. What is the relevancy? Naked,
Yeah.
you know. So when I was an independent social worker, although it was a white mother who was actually in prison, she was a drug dealer, and in fact, Brixton, she was like a prolific drug dealer, white woman among all these black men. So you know she could hold her own. But anyway, she got caught. She was in jail, right? Listen, you wanted it real. I'm just giving it to you real. You can.
I'm not
take it out.
editing. I am not taking it out. It's staying in. It's staying in.
So she was in prison. This was her second child. The first child, her father had, not her mum. Her father was looking after it with his wife in some obscure Staffordshire village where there were no black people. And then she had the second baby, and they wanted to know if, you know, she was capable of parenting. And I remember not just using the you know, the triangle that we use, but looking at, you know, when I did the work with her, we did timelines. We did, you know, when was her first experience of being chastised? What was the relationship with her dad like? How did it present itself? And then, you know, we use the cycle of change, because when we write social work reports and we're doing them for court, one of the questions is, can this parent change in time with the child's development? That's the fundamental question.
Yeah.
And often when I have been an independent social worker and gone to court, I'm able to answer those questions because of the tools I use.
Yeah.
Because it's research and factual based. Often social workers just it's just random.
What do you mean?
You know, like, okay, you don't think the mother can change. Where's the evidence? Not just because you think, not just because you say. How have you tested that hypothesis? Sorry, that's my research brain coming into it. And often, even when I've done mentoring and when I've done teaching, I ask those questions. And one of the things, and you know, Social Work England will say this, there's articles in community care. I think it's changing, but sometimes we can be very bad at using not just the tools, but the research.
Right. Yes.
And then do you understand what I'm saying to you?
Because the research is there that says a lot more than, in fact, the research can actually throw us out of our preconceptions.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of research there.
Yeah. And then also, and the other thing that I'm sometimes charged with when I ask those questions is, you know, okay, put it this way. If you, whatever color, creed, race you are, if you break your child's arm, it is child abuse. Yeah? If you hit your child and you broke the arm or you leave bruises, it's child abuse. That's not questioned to me. But there are some areas, like, for example, a 15-year-old collecting her 10-year-old from school. Well, if you don't think that's child protection, or if you're only saying that because that's a black family, then, you know, you're not doing your job properly.
Right.
So you're forever, as a black social worker over the years, as a black professional, I'm not allowed to question. I'm not allowed to question. And I'm certainly not allowed to question a white person. Yeah. I did tell you this story, but because I mean I'm going all over the place, but I'm just sort of trying to give examples. So I did tell the story of the white consultant pediatrician. 2 stories I'm going to tell you, who decided that the parents were too light, too fair-skinned to have a dark child. So therefore, the mother must have had an affair and not told the father.
Is this something you saw?
Oh, yes. Yes, he says it became a big thing in where I worked. It's fact. I'm not making it up. I swear I'm not making it up.
Okay.
So there was that. Then there was a line in a strategy report which said, the child said her father was a yardie. And the next sentence was, this means he's a drug dealer and a
You said this to me
criminal.
before. I don't believe you.
Okay. You don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you.
What year was this?
This was 2022.
No way. No way.
Bear with me 1 second. My
It's
son's
okay.
just going in the fridge.
Let me recover. Don't worry about that in the background. Let me recover.
Jay, get me a drink. Yeah. No. Yes, it was this year. It was 2022. Yeah, it was. I thought it was 2021, but it was 2022. It was 2022. It was this year.
I have to breathe on that.
And when I well, not me, my manager, who at that time was a black manager, challenged it. She was certainly put in her place. And when I, in doing the assessment, asked the child, I didn't say, why did you say this? I just said, tell me a bit about your family, where's your, is your dad black British or thing? And she said, no, he's from Kenya. Yeah. And then I was told, when I challenged it, not my direct manager, but the manager above her, so the service manager said, oh, well, why don't you just write and complain? Why don't I write and complain? Yeah. And my direct experience is I was working with a family. Mother was Turkish, and we were at a meeting. She has a teenage daughter, 14. And she said in the meeting, she said, I don't know what's wrong with her and all those black hairstyles, because she had a friend who was black who would cane roll her hair. She said, I don't know what's wrong with all them black hairstyles. And she liked black boys, and they're all criminals and drug dealers.
So,
and again, before I could say anything, my colleague, who was a white German woman, challenged her. And by the time we got back to the office, my white colleague had complained to all the hierarchical structures. And nobody did anything. And I was still expected to continue to work with this woman.
just tell me you're not making this up.
I swear on my life, I'm not making it up. I swear on my good health, I'm not making it up. And this is all 2021, 2022.
Okay. Let me ask you, because you brought something up just before we came on live. I want to just touch on this. And then I have 2 questions for you after that. Mental health. Why did you bring it up before we started?
I brought it up because I think that many of us as black people, but many of us in particular as black professionals who work in certain spaces, have anxiety, We have to regularly code switch. We have to regularly hold ourselves in.
Code
We are held
switch.
to
Code
code
switch.
switch, code switching. You know, okay, how I am. Okay, let me put it this way. In my house or with my friends, we can laugh and joke, and it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have worked in the workspace where if there's more than 3 Black people sitting on a table, at least one Black person will say, "Oh, we shouldn't be laughing so loud."
Yeah.
Or, a white person come along and say, "Oh, is this a conspiracy?" Yeah.
Okay. Carry on.
Um,
You've explained. I get you. I knew it. I knew what it meant, but I need to
yeah.
get
So
up.
we live in a constant code switching mode. Yeah. And there's a book, and if people want to read it, they can.
Mm.
There's two books, but there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's about when we live with perpetual anxiety, it creates trauma. And when it creates trauma, it affects our mental health. And again, if I talk about my own experience, okay, I had not realized that I was living at work and throughout the years in spaces I've worked in what I now recognize is a state of anxiety.
Mm.
And it didn't come to the fore until a role in an organization which every day, this is the same place I told you where the consultant pediatrician said this child couldn't be that person's child in that environment, where and this person's a yardie, so they're a drug dealer, or you don't understand safeguarding, and everything you did was questioned. And then I started my therapy course, and as part of that you have to have therapy.
Yeah.
And at that point I recognized I'd been living in a state of anxiety.
Can we explore that a little bit?
Yeah.
What does that mean? So, for example, you turn up to work, you do your assessments, you meet the families. How
So
how
I was okay. I think, and I've demonstrated, I think, I've been commended by courts and local authorities and things in my reports, and even I write immigration reports, and I've always been commended. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's times when I've gone into work or I'm doing something or thinking about something, and I second guess myself. I second guess, okay, I've done this, and I'm thinking, okay, I know this is valid, but let me read it again just in case.
In case of what?
In case it's not good enough, in
Why is it?
case
So
somebody out
so we can
there,
say that's imposter syndrome. What are you?
partly
What's that got to do with the color of your skin and racism?
because I think that it happens. Okay, first of all, if we go back to code switching, many of us, when we leave our house, not just to go to work, but we leave our houses, we put on what I call the coat of armor. So when I do some therapeutic work with Black men, for example, they'll say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine." And I say, "Okay, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you because you have anxiety or you need therapy. Don't mean there's anything wrong with you. But if you leave your house and you get in your car and you're driving down the road and a police car comes round the corner,
Straight.
what do you think? What do you
Oh,
feel?"
I'm there. I am always thinking I'm going to be pulled over.
Right.
Always.
So that is living in anxiety. And we
Mhm.
don't recognize that that's where we're living. We don't, because we're so used to the space.
Okay.
We're so used to when we leave our homes, we have to be on guard.
Yeah.
I remember, and this is very sad. I've got 4 children. 2 birth children, and 2 I acquired because my sister passed. And I remember, particularly with my older son, who's in his 40s, so your age, I remember saying to him, and this is really sad, if you are at a bus stop and somebody passes out or do something, and this was before mobile phones, think before you help that person, because you could be bending over that poor old lady or man trying to give them CPR and them dead, and then somebody say you killed them. And nobody's going to question it because you're a black man.
Yep.
My son is an immigration lawyer, okay? And about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a really bad winter. And he was, got his coat on, hustling home. And the next thing you know, he was surrounded by 4 police vans. And about 10 police jumped out the car. And they wanted to know where he was going and what he was doing. And he said, well, I'm going home, And then after about 10 minutes, they were getting quite antsy and he was getting quite peed off. So he said to them, can I go in my pocket? Because I want to show you something. And that was after the policeman said, oh, I bet you've seen a lot of the inside of jails. And my son said, yes, I have actually. And then when they looked him up on the computer, he didn't come up with a criminal record, right? So they said, oh, you must be really good at what you do then, because you're always getting off.
Been there.
So he said, can I go in my pocket and, in my wallet, I want to show you something. So he took out his card, which says he's a lawyer, and they backed off. And when he said, why did you stop me? They said, because you were doing the crack walk.
What?
Well, we haven't quite worked out what the crack walk is yet. We're still working on that one. So I use those examples, or my examples at work, as a way of saying that unconsciously we live in an anxiety space.
Of course. So when we go to work with this.
Yeah. And as social workers, more to the point, we can offer experience without recognizing it, vicarious trauma. Because if you're working with domestic abuse, or if you're working with CSE and certain things, you have to read all these terrible things and police reports and pictures and interview children. Trauma is not just what you experience, it can be what you read and what you see.
Yeah.
So that compounded with the level of anxiety that we hold. I always say it is a miracle that more of us are not on medication or sectioned. But what a lot of us do have is, and it's not linked to, it can be linked to diet, but it can just be linked to stress. The body carries the score. Yeah. And when the anxiety and the trauma has nowhere to go, it has to go somewhere.
It will go somewhere all the time. Where is it going to go?
Yeah. All the time. And because as Black people, we are so used to living in that state, we don't recognize it.
Don't recognize it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to just have to pause because my computer is saying it's about to shut down. So I just want to plug it in.
Do that. Guys, while she finds a charger and plugs in, let me tell you, what she's saying is resonating with me because from first-hand experience, this is what it is. I've got 2 more questions for Cynthia. But my heart's going because I recognized what she's talking about a few years back. And just because I recognize it doesn't mean that it's not there. But what it does mean is that I'm able to manage it a lot better. But this is real. Racism is a sore topic, and we are not We have no intention of playing a race card, and we have no intention of making any other race, white people, look bad. I think we're just making plain what has happened and what's still happening. I wish I could I should have pulled some stats up earlier on. I should have pulled some stats up to show how much minorities are in the system. She's back now. In mental health and in children's services, because if we're so much in the statistical fair, surely we have to really analyze, and it's a very difficult job, but it needs to be done. Analyze how we approach our assessments and our perceptions. I've got and I just want to add to what you were saying at the end. I know we broke off there.
Mhm.
The contrast is that there are people in society who never give a second thought when they see police. In fact, I'm guessing that some people, when they see police, they just feel safer.
Mhm.
And people like myself, I feel the complete opposite.
Well, me too. I mean, again, I could tell you another story. Sorry, I could write a book. In a meeting, a colleague said this young lady who'd been attacked, she'd been sexually assaulted, she'd been attacked. But when the police came, they arrested her and not the perpetrators, who happened to be three white men. Just happened because, you know, black men assault as well. But this is just the context. So he was saying she was nervous to, so after that, and then when it was discovered she was the one that was assaulted, she was nervous to go to the police station. But she said she went and she reported it. The police who we work with, who's in our service, looked it up on the system and said, no, 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 it's not on the system. She couldn't have reported it anyway. So I chimed in with my far self. Well, not everybody feels comfortable going into a police station. And I gave the example of, you know, black men, black boys. And this was probably about 2 months before George Floyd, okay? And he turned to me and he said to me, and this is a colleague, so we work in the same team, right? So he's a police officer, but work in the same team, so it's a colleague. He turned around and he said to me, well, you should be grateful because if he was in America, he'd be dead. That's what he said to me.
Okay.
You see, I don't think that I'm the only one with these stories. I don't. I think I've always been, one of the psychiatrists that I worked with said to me, the problem, these were his words, the problem with you, Cynthia, is that you're troublesome. And another word he used, can't remember. And I looked at him and I said, no, he said, you're troublesome and you're a rebel and something else he said. And I said, yes, I agree. And I think he said it to put me down. Because when people say to us, we go back to the first bit of what we were talking about. Do you have a chip on your shoulder? Most black people want to go in defensive mode and says,
Yeah.
no, it's not that. No, I ain't going there. So when he said that, I said to him, actually, I come from a long line of rebels. Because if my people were not rebellious, we'd still be in slavery. And what I would be doing is I'd either be picking cotton or I'd be your son's concubine. One of the two things would be happening. And it was like, oh. And I just went about my way because they say and they design things. And this is where we go back to anxiety.
Yeah.
We then have to either defend, so we get into a spat, or we hold our hands up and back off. Because for many people, they can behave racistly, but you mustn't call them a racist.
Yeah.
And they see racism as if I come along and use the N-word. And That's not what it's about. Most of us, particularly as Black people, particularly as Black social workers, we live with that all the time. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? If we take Priti Patel, I wish we wouldn't, but if we take Priti Patel, okay? Home Secretary, terrible, terrible laws that woman's bringing in.
Yeah, scary.
Terrible. But what happens is,
for me, scary. I can tell you that. Yeah.
No, listen.
Yeah.
For people who may watch this, you need to be scared, right? We need to pay attention. If we could just very briefly, Shamir Begum, that poor young girl.
We're going to do a show on that again.
Right. Well, the government has won the case to take away her citizenship. She was born here, right? So this young girl is stuck in Syria because she can't go to Pakistan where her parents come from, because they said if she got her, they'll behead her and hang her, right? So she's stuck there. They've now brought in, so they've used that as the basis for bringing in the law that says for any of us whose parents or grandparents are not British, they can take away our citizenship, even though we were born here, and send us to any random country. It could be Rwanda, and it could be anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
So I say that to say most places where we work, I call them the plantation structure. So if we take Priti Patel, those laws are clearly, I'm going to use the word racist.
Yeah.
But what happens is, because it's a brown person doing it, people will say, well, it can't possibly be racist, because they don't understand that racism is about power. And she has power. Yeah.
What the question? You're pushing buttons now.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, but
no.
You asked me to be honest, and that's what I'm doing. I don't know any other way.
But this is it now. Honesty is where we go, because it's the only way to go. What do minorities hear? So one set of people will hear safety, and another set will say, hold on a minute. I fall into that category. If I commit a crime of any kind, not that I'm planning to, but I'm unsafe at this point. I'm not hearing safety.
You say that. Sorry to interrupt you, but you say that. I have known them wanting to deport people for having parking tickets. Wow. Because what the law doesn't say what the crime is. What the law says is that you're not fit. You're not a good person. So if you come here as a refugee, for example, and you're a teenage boy and you're Black and you get arrested, or you don't get arrested, you get stopped by the police and they put it in the system. When you apply to remain in England, they say you are not of good character. Yeah. So if you got 5 parking tickets, this government might not, but once it's on the statute, another government could say, or another Home Secretary could say, actually, what we've decided is you've got 5 parking tickets, you don't respect the law, we don't want you here, off you go. So people need to shift from, if I commit a crime. It doesn't say if you commit a crime. There's different legislation for that.
Okay, let's bring this back, because with it, the introduction of these laws and the trauma that minority, I wouldn't say Black people, because not all minorities are the same, and they haven't all had the same experience, to be fair. So it wouldn't be right for me to put that on everybody. And again, Polish are minorities, so it's not about skin color, but we as Black people will walk with this weight. And when we hear these announcements in law, we go to work with this. It's compounding. And I don't know how, and I haven't explored this, but how it may affect practice. But for me personally, it's increased probably my awareness and my empathy levels for people in a struggle, Black or white, because I'm more aware. But I'm going to ask you a question, because I could talk about this all night. 2 more questions. Here we go. When was the last time you cried about this? Tears.
About 6 months ago. Because I've been having therapy. And prior to that, I was the typical myth of the strong Black woman. I pushed through, you know. My sister died. I pushed through. My brother died. My partner died within 6 weeks. I pushed through because that's what we do. At work, you push through. I go into Harrods, even Primark, and the security guard follows me and I push through. I get in a car, or I'm in the car with my son, or my son visits me, and when I said, text me when you get home, I push through. Yeah, you do have empathy for clients, whatever race or ethnicity they are, they do. But you also know, even if we don't want to acknowledge it, that there are some clients that are treated differently with the same issue. Now, I'm not going to mention any names, but when I was teaching, I used two very famous women, and I took all the newspaper cuttings and I made a case study from the newspaper cuttings, and I didn't put their names, I just did the thing. And I gave it out to the students and I said, this comes across your desk, what would you do? Oh, definitely safeguarding, definitely Section 47, definitely child protection. They said it all. And then I was able to say, oh, that's interesting. Why do you say that? Why do you say this? You know, give me your logic. An hour of that. And then I said, okay, these are two real people. Oh, well, what happened to the children? Nothing. They still have their children. And then I showed them who the two people were and shared the newspaper cuttings.
Yeah.
So we could, what I say to people is, we would like it to be different. We strive for it to be different, but sometimes we just have to live and not accept, but we have to know what it is.
Yeah.
Because continuing to live in this perpetual I'll pretend is driving us crazy, and we don't know it, but it's driving us crazy.
Yeah. I saw a clip. I love talk radio, that actual channel. I actually like the channel.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with everything that they say. But what I do appreciate the most is that they're prepared to have a discussion, whether they agree with me or not. And where is this racism, white supremacy? I have never used the term white supremacy. I think this is the first time I've ever really used it. I don't think it really explains what it is, but the presenter didn't agree that it existed. I would rather not look at your supremacy, but rather look at where I am in the whole system and my experience, which is what you've done today. You've made the experience clearer by not focusing on those in power, but focusing on those who have been disempowered. Your narrative has actually made it make sense. Which is what I'm saying. I'm not going to try and say that you've got all this power as a white man. No, let me show you where I am, and then tell me where you think it all fits in. I've got one more question for you. Your number one piece of advice for anyone feeling the way you have or are?
I wish that I had not just spoken about it to my friends, because we can have pity parties. Do you know what I mean? We all get together and we talk about the experience and it's really terrible, but we
Yeah.
still hold it. I always say to people, get some professional help, get some coaching, get some mentoring, get some therapy. And by doing that, it's not just about relief, and it's not just about living in all that anxiety and trauma, but also the trauma of the work, the vicarious trauma. You know, because it frees your soul. That's all I can say. It frees your soul. You know, and it's about how can we in the caring professions, nurses, doctors, healthcare workers, social workers, how can we continue to function in our own lives when all this is going on around us and we're in it? Firefighters, policemen, ambulance men,
You have to get therapy.
doctors, nurses, lots of healthcare professionals, and it came out since COVID, but it happened before. They all get clinical support. As social workers, they say, well, you're not doing clinical work, so you don't need it. But you do, even if it's for self. And having counseling and getting some clinical support and being able to have that space where I'm not judged was freeing. It freed my soul.
Okay. I feel like we're doing an injustice because I have to cut it.
That's fine. I'm here.
You're here for round 2, though.
Whenever you're ready.
Guys, you heard it. I mean, I feel like I had some therapy today, you know. You woke up some of the old spirits in me of you reminded me of what I am actually going through. And a lot of what's happened today I didn't expect. So I appreciate where you've taken it. I hope that the listeners can learn from this, whether you agree or not. It's not always about the truth. Sometimes it's about the perception of the truth that we have to manage. Cynthia, I want to thank you for joining us. We will see you soon.
My pleasure. Can I just add one thing? I'm talking about my lived experience. So I don't need, no disrespect to anybody. If it's not your lived experiences, that's fine. But this is mine. Because sometimes what happens, somebody will say their lived experience and somebody will say, well, it didn't happen to me, so it can't be true. This is my lived experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That was my point. Yeah. This is yours. This is your narrative.
Yeah.
Whether you agree or whether you think it's true or not, this is what she felt. This is what you've perceived. This is what you saw. And at least we're having a discussion.
Yeah.
At the very least, and an awareness of what's going on. Yeah. Appreciate that. We're going to get you back on, like I said. Guys, please share, please subscribe. You know, it's helpful. If you have something to say, if you have a narrative about anything to do with the front line, as a social worker, as a carer, police officer, nurse, student, come join the show. Thank you for your time, Cynthia. Guys, thanks for listening. I'm going to end this right here. Look after yourselves.